China tried to enter Greenland quietly, and what happened next reshaped the entire Arctic geopolitical map. By the end of this video, you will never look at Greenland the same way again, because what this island actually represents goes far beyond ice and polar bears. It's about power, rare earth minerals, military positioning, and a silent competition playing out in one of the most remote places on the planet. Most people, when they picture Greenland, imagine a frozen wasteland. Beautiful, maybe, but largely irrelevant to world affairs. That assumption is wrong. Dangerously, strategically wrong. And the fact that you probably never heard the full story of what China attempted on this island and how aggressively the United States responded is itself part of the problem. Because this story has been happening in plain sight, buried under layers of diplomatic language and quiet logistics, and in a moment, you'll understand exactly why both Beijing and Washington consider this island worth fighting over without ever firing a single shot. Let's start with the geography, because the map tells you everything. Greenland is the world's largest island, stretching roughly 2 million square kilometers across the North Atlantic and Arctic Ocean. It sits between Europe and North America, directly underneath the polar routes that connect continents, the same routes that intercontinental ballistic missiles would travel in a conflict scenario. Military analysts have called Greenland one of the most strategically located pieces of land on Earth. Not because of its population, which hovers around 57,000 people, mostly concentrated in the capital Nuuk, but because of what it overlooks, what it hides underground, and what it controls in terms of Arctic access. And here's where it gets interesting. Because China figured this out before most Western governments were willing to admit it publicly. The story that almost nobody tells begins around 2016, when a Chinese company attempted to purchase a former United States naval base in northern Greenland. The base in question was Grønnedal, a Cold War-era installation that the Danish military had decommissioned. To many observers, it looked like a straightforward real estate transaction. A company wanted to buy an old base, renovate it, maybe turn it into something commercial. Danish authorities blocked the sale after pressure from Copenhagen. What went largely unreported at the time was the level of concern this transaction generated within intelligence and defense circles across both Denmark and the United States. And if you think that was an isolated incident, hold on, because it wasn't even close to the last attempt. If you enjoy these deep dives into hidden geography and geopolitical strategy, consider subscribing. There's a lot more of this to come. Around 2018, a different Chinese state-linked company submitted a proposal to build 3 airports in Greenland, in Nuuk, Ilulissat, and Qaqortoq. The offer was, on the surface, economically attractive. Greenland's infrastructure is genuinely underdeveloped. The island lacks a comprehensive road network. Not a single highway connects its towns, because the terrain and permafrost make it nearly impossible. Air travel is the primary way to move between communities. So the idea of modern airports, funded and built with Chinese capital, was not immediately dismissed. The Greenlandic government, which operates with significant autonomy under Danish sovereignty, was listening. And that is exactly what alarmed officials in Washington. The United States government made its position clear through back channels first, and then more directly. Reports from that period indicate that American officials communicated to both Copenhagen and Nuuk that Chinese infrastructure investment in Greenland would be viewed as a serious strategic concern. The reasoning was straightforward. Whoever builds critical infrastructure tends to maintain a long-term presence managing it. Chinese-built airports with Chinese contractors, Chinese communication systems, Chinese financing structures. That's not just construction. That's access. And Greenland's geographic position means access there translates directly to monitoring capability over North Atlantic shipping lanes, submarine routes, and early warning radar corridors. The U.S. did not want China holding any of those keys. And in a moment, you'll see how Washington decided to respond. And it was not subtle. But first, let's talk about what's underground. Because the geopolitical chess match over Greenland is not only about military positioning, It's also about what climate scientists and mining geologists have been saying for years, that as the Greenlandic ice sheet retreats due to warming temperatures, it is exposing some of the most significant deposits of rare earth elements on the planet. We're talking about neodymium, dysprosium, praseodymium, materials that are essential for manufacturing electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, advanced military electronics, and smartphone components. The Kvanefjeld deposit in southern Greenland, for instance, is considered one of the largest known rare earth concentrations outside of China. And here is the part that makes this story genuinely wild. China currently controls somewhere around 80% of global rare earth processing capacity. If China gained influence over Greenland's deposits through investment, through infrastructure, through long-term partnerships, the strategic implications for Western supply chains would be severe. This is not theoretical. This is the calculation that defense planners in multiple countries have been running for years. So what did the United States actually do when it realized China was making moves on this island? In 2019, President Donald Trump publicly floated the idea of the United States purchasing Greenland outright. Denmark called it absurd. Greenland's government called it disrespectful of their right to self-determination. The international media largely treated it as a bizarre episode of political theater. But here's what people missed in the noise. The purchase proposal, however unrealistic, forced a public conversation that had previously been confined to classified briefings. It put Greenland on the map, literally, in the minds of millions of people who had never thought about it strategically. And whether that was intentional or not, what followed was a significant escalation of American engagement with the island that went far beyond one headline. The United States committed to reopening a consulate in Nuuk in 2020, the first American consulate in Greenland in decades. The U.S. government announced a financial package worth roughly $12 million, specifically directed at Greenlandic development, framed explicitly as an alternative to outside investment from less transparent sources. American officials began making direct visits to Nuuk, building relationships with Greenlandic politicians and business leaders. And the U.S. Air Force's Thule Air Base, located in the far northwest of Greenland, one of the most northerly military installations on Earth, received renewed attention, investment discussions, and strategic reaffirmation as a critical node in American Arctic defense posture. Here's the twist that ties everything together. Greenland itself is caught in the middle of something enormous. The island's population is predominantly Greenlandic Inuit, and the political conversation within Nuuk is increasingly focused on the long-term goal of full independence from Denmark. Greenland already controls its own domestic affairs, its own fisheries, its own resource policy to a large extent. But full sovereignty, cutting the formal tie to Copenhagen, would require economic self-sufficiency. And right now, Greenland receives a substantial annual block grant from Denmark that covers a significant portion of its government budget. The resource wealth sitting under the melting ice could theoretically change that equation. And every major power on Earth knows it. This creates a situation where Greenland finds itself simultaneously courted and pressured by forces far larger than itself. China has framed its interest in terms of economic partnership and infrastructure development. The United States has framed its interest in terms of shared values, Arctic security, and long-term strategic alignment. Denmark watches carefully, knowing that how it manages this relationship will shape its own relevance in the Arctic for generations. And somewhere in Nuuk, Greenlandic politicians are navigating all of it, trying to secure their people's future without becoming a pawn in someone else's game. That tension between genuine Greenlandic self-determination and the gravitational pull of great power competition is the most human part of a story that often gets told in purely strategic terms. What makes Greenland's situation genuinely unique is that it doesn't fit neatly into any existing geopolitical framework. It's not a fully independent nation. It's not a traditional colony. It's an autonomous territory with its own identity, its own language, its own government, caught between the Arctic's frozen past and a rapidly warming future that is physically reshaping the island in real time. Scientists who study the Greenland ice sheet report that it is losing mass at an accelerating rate. What this means for global sea levels is alarming in itself. But within the narrow logic of resource geopolitics, it also means that the window for accessing what's underneath is opening faster than anyone predicted 2 decades ago. The race isn't coming. In many ways, it has already begun. Here's why this matters beyond the Arctic. The competition over Greenland is a preview of the kind of conflict that will define the coming decades. Not wars fought with armies crossing borders, but influence campaigns, infrastructure investments, diplomatic pressure, and strategic positioning in places most people never think about. The same playbook is being run across Central Asia, across Africa, across Pacific Island chains. Greenland is simply one of the clearest examples because the strategic value is so obvious and the competing interests are so visible once you know where to look. The rare earth question alone should give anyone pause. Modern civilization runs on minerals that are extraordinarily difficult to source outside of a handful of locations. The energy transition, solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, requires those same minerals in quantities that current supply chains cannot comfortably meet. Greenland, sitting on potentially vast deposits, is not just an Arctic curiosity. It is a future battleground for the materials that will power the world. And the decisions being made right now, in Nuuk and Copenhagen, and Washington and Beijing, will shape who controls those materials and on what terms. China did not simply walk away when its airport proposals were blocked or when its real estate moves were rejected. Reports from geopolitical research institutions suggest that Beijing has continued to explore softer forms of engagement. Academic partnerships, fishing agreements, scientific cooperation framed around Arctic climate research. The infrastructure door may have closed for now, but the interest has not disappeared. And that means the dynamic described in this video is ongoing. It is not history. It is current events, unfolding in slow motion across one of the most consequential and overlooked territories on the planet. Greenland is not just a big island on a map. It's a test case for how the world manages competition over resources, geography, and sovereignty in the 21st century. And the story is far from over. If this kind of deep geographic and geopolitical analysis is what you're here for, hit subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about understanding the world beyond the surface. Drop a comment below with your answer to this question. Do you think Greenland should pursue full independence? And, if it does, who do you think benefits most? Check the link in the description for more on Arctic geopolitics. See you in the next one.